Welcome to our story today. Husband abandoned his wife while she was still unconscious. In the intensive care unit. In this heart-wrenching episode, we delve into the emotional turmoil faced by a husband as he grapples with a difficult decision. When his wife, who is in the ICU, fails to regain consciousness, he makes a choice that leaves viewers questioning the depths of love, loyalty, and resilience. Viewers will be taken on an emotional journey, witnessing the husband's internal struggle. The video explores his feelings of helplessness and despair as he watches his beloved wife lie unconscious, unable to offer reassurance or hope. It's a poignant illustration of how life can change in an instant, leaving us to confront our deepest fears and vulnerabilities. Inform us if you are enthusiastic about this narrative. If you are, press 1 if you found the video to be enjoyable. If this is not the case, press 0. Your comments are a great source of motivation for me to collect more stories that are uplifting and meaningful.
Upon learning that his wife had not regained consciousness in the ICU, the husband withdrew his support during the medical board meeting. And upon discovering the inheritance from foreigners. In the spacious conference room of the First City Hospital, an unusual tension hung in the air for this time of day. The interior, imbued with the spirit of sterile medicine, was in stark contrast to the profound sadness that filled the room. Medical records lay on the table, each holding the story of a human life closely tied to some illness. The room, filled with people in white coats, was no coincidence, as a medical board had been convened to discuss the condition of a patient who had recently undergone a complex surgical operation. Her name was Anita Smith, a 30-year-old woman who had been in a terrible car accident a few days ago. Despite the surgery, her condition remained unstable. For this reason, the medical board had been assembled on very short notice to evaluate the situation. At the center of the room stood Dr. Kevin Reed, the neurosurgeon who had personally overseen the surgery. Tall, with stern features and a penetrating gaze, he was known for his professionalism and impeccable reputation. Next to him stood several other doctors, an intensivist, a therapist, an anesthesiologist, and a palliative care physician. At that moment, there was a soft but clear knock on the conference room door. Charles Palmer, Anita's husband, entered the room. Under the bright lights, he appeared thin and slightly stooped, his rough facial features hinting at a difficult character. He was dressed in a black linen shirt and jeans, an outfit that seemed ill-suited for a hospital visit. To the surprise of many, Charles's eyes showed neither anxiety, nor remorse, nor even simple curiosity. "Charles Palmer, please come in and have a seat." "We haven't started yet," Dr. Kevin said, gesturing to a spot beside him, but Charles walked past him. "Sorry, I don't want to interrupt," he said in a cold tone and turned away. No, Mr. Palmer, please don't say that. We all want you to be informed about Anita's condition. Therefore, we would like to hear your opinion," the doctor said, quietly but firmly. "Opinion? What opinion?" The visitor shrugged in confusion. "The only thing that matters to me is that the treatment is effective, everything else is irrelevant." The doctor hesitated slightly, feeling a wave of negativity. "Charles, we understand that this is a difficult time for you, but Anita needs your support, love, and care. We want to discuss the possibility of further treatment with you." "What further treatment? What are you talking about? Nothing will change anyway. She's a vegetable, isn't she?" Charles smirked. A tense silence fell over the room after his words. The doctors exchanged meaningful glances. The patient's spouse's response was more than a little audacious. "Mr. Reed, we understand you're upset, but please, keep your composure," tried to calm him down Katrina Gibson, the attending physician. Charles's face flushed with anger. "You keep talking about Anita. She's so ill, she needs support. But who will support me? Who will help me with the affairs, the loans? I want to live a normal life. And her condition is preventing me from doing that. I refuse to have any part in this. Let anyone else deal with her, but not me." Charles spoke with no hint of shame, as if openly admitting his indifference. The medical staff were stunned. Over the years, they had dealt with relatives of patients in critical conditions, but they had never encountered such cynicism. Charles, do you realize what you're saying? Anita is still unconscious. She needs you. The anesthesiologist couldn't hold back, but Charles just sneered. He then quickly turned and left the conference room without looking back. At that moment, in the ICU, Anita regained consciousness. The first thing she felt was the cool air entering her lungs as she made the difficult and unfamiliar effort to breathe. The room was filled with the usual hospital silence, interrupted only by the occasional beeping of machines that reminded her of her precarious state. Soon, the door to the room opened, and the new nurse Carrie appeared in the doorway. She had been hired recently and had yet to adjust to the challenging conditions of the intensive care unit. Carrie adjusted her gown and looked around the room. Suddenly, her attention was caught by the glowing monitor near Anita's bed. The readings had noticeably changed, and the nurse's heart began to race with anxiety. She approached closer, feeling a spark of hope rising in her chest. The patient lay motionless, but Carrie couldn't tear her eyes away from Anita. The woman looked fragile and defenseless, with a pale, gaunt face and dark circles under her eyes. Glancing at the monitor again, Carrie gently touched Anita's hand to check for any response to tactile stimulation. "Anita?" Carrie whispered. "Can you hear me?" Anita didn't respond, but something within her seemed to react to this external stimulus. The patient's consciousness was like a fog. Nevertheless, Carrie noticed that Anita's fingers began to twitch slightly. Holding her breath, the nurse watched as Anita's eyelids slowly began to open. At first, just a millimeter, then a bit wider. Carrie couldn't help but smile. "You're completely safe, don't be afraid." Anita opened her eyes slightly and then closed them again. Everything around seemed blurry, but at the same time, she felt the warmth coming from the nurse's words. Gradually, the visual picture started to clear. The flicker of light, the steady beeping of machines, and the sterile smell of antiseptic. Anita could only remember fragments: a phone call, her husband's laughter, then a sudden impact, pain, and pitch-black darkness. "I'm thirsty. I want to drink," she whispered, barely audible. "Anita, you're in the ICU, you can't drink right now." "That's the most I can offer," Carrie said. She soaked a piece of gauze in water and touched it to the patient's lips, which brought noticeable relief. Gradually, the sounds around became clearer. "You're very strong. The doctors did everything they could, and now you're back with us." "It will just take a little time to recover," Carrie whispered. Anita nodded slightly, closing her eyes to signal the nurse that she had heard her. Carrie checked the vital signs once more, recorded the data, and left to find Anita's attending physician, Katrina. Anita opened her eyes again and looked around the room. She was alone once more. Where was Charles? Couldn't he come to see her even for a minute? Her eyes filled with tears. She lay with her eyes closed, desperately trying to escape the flood of memories as if someone had turned on an old film projector. On the inner screen of her consciousness, vivid but tormenting images flashed by. Suddenly, the room was filled with the air tinged with sunlight and the scent of pine. Anita distinctly heard the gentle whisper of waves lapping against the side of a yacht rented by one of her wealthy friends, as well as Charles's bright and carefree laughter. That day, 5 years ago, she was, as always, the center of attention. Her university swim team friends, a group of athlete students, were sunbathing on the upper deck. Anita, however, preferred to spend her time in the library, in a cozy, quiet corner on the second floor. She was deeply engrossed in her reading, oblivious to everything around her. Having recently graduated with honors, she envisioned herself as a successful economist. "Anita, you're something else," came the cheerful male voice nearby. "Do you plan to spend your whole life buried in that book? Come out into the fresh air instead of staying in this stuffy room." Anita lifted her head and smiled. Bruce, one of her friends, was standing before her. "Oh, I'll be fine. I just don't want to do anything but finish this book right now. It's so interesting, with so much going on." "Well, suit yourself," Bruce waved his hand. "We're heading up to the upper deck now. There's dancing and it's a lot of fun. Join us." He left, and Anita buried her nose back in her book. But her concentration waned. Thoughts, like a mischievous wave, carried her away, making her look up and gaze out of the porthole. The yacht glided smoothly through the waves, casting sand-sprayed arcs to the side. Enormous barges floated by, their hulls shining in the sun like giant mirrors. She recalled her childhood and her favorite activity, swimming. How easily she used to swim then. How she loved the feeling of the water. It was like being at home. When Anita remembered her first victory at a competition, a smile appeared on her lips. At that moment, a burst of loud laughter from the upper deck caught her attention. She moved closer to the porthole. There was a lively group of students, graduates from her class and others. Everyone was dressed in bright clothes, their faces glowing with tans. Anita was surprised. She hadn't realized how quickly time had passed. She had spent several hours in the library, though it felt like only minutes. "Anita, come here," she heard Bruce's voice. "We're about to jump." Bruce had been trying to court her since their 4th year, but he hadn't succeeded. He had persisted, giving her flowers and writing poems, but all to no avail. Anita didn't love him and treated his awkward advances with a hint of irony. She flinched slightly, feeling a twinge of embarrassment at the sound of his voice. "No, Bruce, I'm not going to. I don't want to get my hair wet." "Oh, come on, silly." Bruce laughed. "Charles and I are having a bet. Whoever jumps the farthest gets the others to pay for drinks." Anita looked at the deck where the young people were making noise and preparing to jump. Her gaze caught Charles's figure. He was standing at the edge of the deck, raising his hand in a welcoming gesture. There was a trace of hesitation in his eyes. Anita involuntarily smiled. She had known him since childhood. They had attended school together, though in different classes, and then went to college. Charles was known as a cheerful and lively guy with many friends. He always liked to be the center of attention. But despite his charm, Charles was considered somewhat frivolous and thoughtless in their circle. It was no surprise that his friends had nicknamed him the Roguish Prince. "Anita, why are you standing there?" Bruce winked. "Are you in love or something?" Anita blushed. "Oh, come on, Bruce." She waved it off. "It's just Charles, you know him. And I know you too." Bruce smiled. "And I can see that you like him. You always look at him in a special way." "Oh, stop it." Anita tried to joke it off, but deep down, she knew Bruce was right. She had indeed liked Charles for several months now. Anita looked forward to every new meeting with him, delighted in every playful compliment he gave, and secretly dreamed that one day he would confess his feelings for her. "Well, come on, Anita, jump." Bruce pushed her toward the edge of the deck. "I'm sure Charles won't ignore you." Anita hesitated but agreed in the end. She took a few deep breaths and climbed to the edge. Below, the turquoise expanse of water spread out, reflecting the sun like a giant mirror. Her heart raced faster. "Anita, come on, jump." Bruce urged her. "Don't be scared." "I'm not scared," Anita replied, though her voice trembled. She closed her eyes and jumped. The cold water enveloped her from head to toe. She pushed off from the wave and surfaced. Quickly, she scanned the area for Charles and saw him standing on the deck, laughing and waving at her. "Anita, you're magnificent," he shouted, smiling. "You jump beautifully." She smiled back. "Let me teach you how to jump," she offered. "You've never dived, have you?" "No, not really." "I don't like the water much," Charles replied. An elusive expression flickered briefly in his eyes, but she didn't dwell on it. "Well then, let me teach you." Anita swam towards the ladder leading to the deck. "Come on, come to me." Charles laughed and took a few steps. "Just don't think I'll jump from that height," he said. "I don't want to break my neck." "Oh, come on." Anita smiled. Don't worry, everything will be fine. Charles climbed onto the deck and descended the ladder into the water. All right, show me, he said, smiling at her. Anita took his hand and swam towards the platform. Watch carefully, she said. First, you need to take a few deep breaths to get some air, and then you need to feel the water. It should become a part of you. Charles listened to her words attentively, his eyes filled with interest. Don't be afraid, Anita continued, I'll be right here to help. Okay, let's do it, Charles agreed, with a hint of uncertainty in his voice. I'll give you a push, Anita said with a smile. Wait. Charles flinched. I changed my mind. I'd rather stay here on the platform. Aren't you afraid of falling if you lose your balance? Anita asked, smiling at him. No, I'm not afraid, Charles replied, trying to hide his uncertainty. You're so funny, she said with a smile. Don't be afraid of the water. I'll teach you. All right, he agreed. So, shall we jump? Anita asked, looking into his eyes. Let's do it, Charles agreed, with less uncertainty in his voice. They climbed the ladder together, and Anita took his hand. Look, she said, first take a deep breath, and then we jump. Count to 3. 1, 2, 3. Anita released his hand, and Charles took a step forward. But at that very moment, he lost his balance and fell overboard. Charles! Anita shouted. Her heart stopped with fear, and she quickly jumped into the water, swimming to where the guy had fallen. Charles, are you okay? She asked. Yeah, I think so, he replied, struggling to surface. I'm not very good at swimming. All right, I'll help you to the ladder, Anita said, taking his hand. Soon, they both managed to get back onto the deck. Thanks, Charles said, blushing with embarrassment. Did I scare you a lot? Not really, Anita replied, smiling. I saved you, after all. Charles smiled, and in his eyes, the embarrassment was replaced by something else, something deeper. They sat silently on the deck, gazing at the darkening evening sky, each lost in their own thoughts. Nearby, Bruce occasionally passed by, trying to make a joke at the expense of the secluded couple. So, what do you like more? Charles asked, as if reading her thoughts. Swimming or reading? I don't know, Anita replied. Probably both. You know, I think we're very similar, Charles said confidently. Similar? Anita couldn't help but laugh. In what way? We're both searching for freedom, Charles answered, and we believe we'll find it. Maybe, she agreed. And what now? The outing is over, and the yacht is already at the dock. How about we go to a cafe? Charles suggested, standing up. We can have coffee and chat. Sure, Anita agreed. They descended from the deck, and Charles gently took her hand. Soon, under Bruce's envious gaze, they left the yacht and walked toward the cafe. After thinking for a moment, Bruce decided to follow them. Here it is. Charles pointed to a cozy place with a terrace. The atmosphere is great and the coffee is superb. Anita nodded. She really liked the warm glow emanating from the cafe. Inside, candles were already being lit, creating a romantic twilight. She felt Charles's grip on her hand tighten. There was something in his touch that made her heart beat faster. As they walked, Bruce, clearly unwilling to be left out, tried to insert himself into their conversation. I'd recommend Café Lancelot. Their desserts are excellent. He shouted, but his words were lost in the noise of the dock. Let's see what this place has to offer, Charles said with a gentle smile, not noticing the competitors' persistent attempts to join them. Inside the cafe, the smell of cinnamon and coffee mixed with the aroma of fresh pastries. Charles helped Anita remove her light jacket and hung it on a chair. They settled at a table by the window, with a view of the Sunset Harbor. You know, Charles began, his gaze sliding over Anita and lingering on her lips, I've never felt as good as I do today. I've enjoyed it too, Anita admitted, blushing. You're so, Charles hesitated, searching for the right words. You have such a gentle soul, I can really feel it. She lowered her eyes. She liked Charles's words, but at the same time, she didn't want to rush things. After all, she didn't know him very well yet, and the school years spent in parallel classes didn't seem like a strong enough foundation for starting a relationship. Although intuition suggested that there was something special about him, something that could turn her world upside down. Bruce, who was persistently trying to attract attention, had already ordered coffee and was sitting at a nearby table. He watched from afar as Anita and Charles, feeling his heart tighten with jealousy. What do you prefer at this time of day? Charles asked, not taking his eyes off Anita. I love tea with lemon, she replied, feeling awkward with Bruce sitting nearby and clearly not happy about their conversation. Great. Charles smiled and got up, heading towards the bar. I'll get us some tea and something sweet. What do you like? Well, I'm not sure, Anita said, gazing thoughtfully out the window, but maybe tiramisu. Perfect, Charles winked and disappeared through the door. Bruce couldn't stand it. He got up and walked over to their table. Anita, he began uncertainly. Would you like to try my dessert? I ordered eclairs with rum filling. Thanks, she averted her gaze, but I'd rather have tiramisu. Oh, Bruce seemed a bit flustered. Well, maybe later? Let's do it later, Anita agreed, trying to be polite. Bruce returned to his table, and Anita felt uneasy. She knew he was secretly in love with her, but couldn't reciprocate his feelings. I'm sorry, she whispered when Charles came back with the order. Bruce tried to invite me to his table? So what? Charles didn't pay much attention to her words. He has every right to talk to you. Not exactly, Anita replied. I feel uncomfortable. I understand, Charles nodded. But don't worry. If he keeps bothering you, I'll handle it. Anita smiled. They drank tea in silence, watching the view from the window. Anita felt her mood improving. She realized her friendship with Bruce had reached a dead end. She had long wanted to talk to him seriously, but didn't know how to approach it. Charles took a sip of his coffee and placed his hand on her shoulder. Anita, he began, I want to tell you something important. What? She asked, looking into his eyes with concern. I really like you. Anita couldn't believe her ears. She knew Charles had feelings for her, but she didn't expect him to confess so soon. Charles, she whispered, I don't know what to say. I understand, he replied, and I'm not expecting an answer right now. But what happens now? She asked. He smiled. We'll see. Life is full of surprises. At that moment, Bruce approached their table again. Anita, he began, I wanted to tell you. Bruce. Charles interrupted him, getting up from the table. We're leaving now. Bruce looked flustered. We're going for a walk, Charles added, no hard feelings, Bruce. With that, he took Anita's hand and led her to the exit. Bruce stood alone at the table, his face as pale as chalk. They left the cafe and walked along the riverbank. The evening was quiet and peaceful. The city lights reflected in the water, and Anita felt happy. In a moment of emotion, Charles kissed her on the cheek and buried his fingers in her hair. I'm so glad you're here, he confessed. My life isn't the same without you. They walked hand in hand along the riverbank. Their silhouettes darkened against the setting sun. Time flew by unnoticed. Charles became a support for Anita, a reliable shoulder she could lean on at any moment. But her happiness was marred by concerns for Bruce. He didn't disappear from her life. Instead, he continued to appear from time to time at the cafe where she and Charles met with friends, trying not to miss any of their evenings together. Bruce still looked at her with longing eyes, and his gaze was filled with sadness. Are you afraid of him? Charles asked one evening as they sat on a cozy sofa at his home. The room was lit with a warm lamp, and a soothing melody played from the speakers. No, I'm not afraid, Anita said, turning to face him. I just feel sorry for him. He's a good person, but I can't give him what he wants." Charles held her close, embracing her gently, as if cradling a fragile flower. "Everything will be fine," he whispered. "I'm sure he'll understand." "I'm not so sure," Anita said, sighing sadly. "I just want him to be happy." "What about his happiness if you aren't happy with him?" Charles suddenly raised his voice. "Anita, you've made your choice. You won't be happy with him. You're happy with me, and that's what matters." "But he suffers so much and drinks so often," Anita started, but Charles interrupted her. "Anita, you can't be responsible for his life. That's his concern. Bruce has to find his own way. You should focus on your own happiness." She looked into her fiancé's eyes and saw sincerity and love in them. At that moment, she realized Charles was right. She didn't need to think about another person, especially at her own expense. Their relationship developed gradually but steadily. Charles proposed in a romantic setting during a walk in the woods. Taking her hand and gazing into her eyes, he asked, "Anita, will you marry me?" She smiled, and her eyes sparkled with happiness. Needless to say, Anita said yes. The wedding was planned for the summer at a beautiful countryside estate with a cozy courtyard and green lawn. Anita dreamed of a beautiful white dress, a lovely ceremony, and a joyful celebration. Charles was thrilled to see her happy, doing everything he could to make the bride's dreams come true. Finally, the long-awaited day arrived. On Anita's side, there were hardly any guests, as her parents had died many years ago in a geological expedition. The helicopter carrying them had encountered a snowstorm and crashed into a mountain slope. Anita had been orphaned at 5 and had been raised by her grandmother, Mary, until she reached adulthood. Unfortunately, her grandmother did not live to see her granddaughter's wedding. She passed away a year before this wonderful event. Anita looked stunning in her white dress, her hair adorned with a crown of white flowers, perfectly complementing her eyes that shone with happiness. Charles, dressed in a black suit, continually gazed at the bride's face with pride and led her to the church building. The ceremony was touching and beautiful. They exchanged rings, made vows of love and fidelity, and their kiss marked the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Then came the reception with all the traditional festivities for a young couple. Guests enjoyed themselves, celebrating their joy. There was plenty of delicious food and drinks, a live orchestra played, and guests were invited to try their hand on the dance floor or at the karaoke microphone. Anita and Charles danced a slow dance, holding hands and exchanging kisses. Their faces radiated happiness, and it felt as though there was no one else around except the two of them. But, as often happens, the idyll was disrupted by the sudden appearance of Bruce. Although he was not as formally dressed as the others, he smiled and sincerely rejoiced for the newlyweds. "How wonderful!" Bruce said to Anita, taking her hand and kissing it. "Happiness to you, friends." Although Bruce wished the newlyweds all the best, there was a hint of disappointment in his voice. "I'm happy for you," he said to Charles, shaking his hand, "though I still don't understand why." Charles smiled and patted him on the shoulder with a touch of condescension. "That's how life is, Bruce," he replied. "You can't have everything you want." Bruce looked at Anita, and a flicker of pain crossed his eyes. He hugged her tightly in farewell and left the hall. The bride watched him go, her heart tightening with a wave of sympathy. Meanwhile, the evening continued. Guests danced, sang, laughed, and offered elaborate toasts to the newlyweds. Charles was pleased. Anita was an accomplished economist working at a successful firm. And he? He was an aspiring young businessman. What a perfect match. Soon Bruce re-entered the hall, struggling to stay on his feet after a long respite at the bar. "Anita, Charles," he said, and Anita could see he was holding a glass of wine as if it were his last chance. "I want to sing you a song." "Bruce," Anita began, but Charles interrupted her. "Go ahead, Bruce, sing," Charles said with a smile. "You have a good voice." Bruce took his words as an invitation and, with unrestrained joy, went to the microphone set up in the center of the dance floor. He began to sing. Anita felt a shiver of unpleasant foreboding, but nothing bad happened. The evening went on. The guests continued to enjoy themselves. Anita and Charles were happy and in love. Bruce, after a few songs, had fallen asleep in the restaurant's storage room, exhausted from alcohol and his failed attempt to win Anita back. The first months after the wedding passed in blissful contentment. Anita and Charles enjoyed each other's company. Life in the new apartment, which Charles had bought with the money he made from selling his share of the family business, seemed like a fairy tale to them. "I'm so glad we finally moved in together," Anita said as she placed her favorite clay figurine, brought back from a trip to the waterfalls, on a shelf. "And I'm glad that my wife is so homey," Charles replied, hugging her and kissing her neck. In the evenings, they watched movies, brewed coffee, and chatted about everything under the sun. Over time, they bought a car, and after getting their licenses, used it as needed. Their relationship seemed to be developing according to the best scenario Anita had dreamed of all her life. But gradually, an invisible chill, like a fog, began to settle into their relationship. Small, almost imperceptible changes, like cracks in a perfect facade, started to appear. "Anita, tonight I'm planning to work late. I have an important meeting with an investor," Charles announced as he left for work. "Of course, Charles," she replied, trying to suppress the slight pang of dissatisfaction that pierced her heart. In the evening, her husband returned tired and nervous, and over dinner, he couldn't resist a glass of red wine, which always induced a relaxing detachment from problems. "Sorry, I'm exhausted today," he mumbled, staring at his smartphone screen, "and I don't want anything but sleep." "Okay," Anita sighed, feeling a cold emptiness in her heart, "I understand." She retreated to the bedroom, picking up another romance novel from the shelf. In its pages, she found warmth and solace, though she knew it was merely an illusion. Deep down, Anita sensed that their relationship was starting to crack. At the same time, there were highly contradictory rumors about Bruce, saying that he had married poorly and lost his apartment. Anita didn't know if it was true or not, but she couldn't stop thinking about him. One evening at dinner, Charles threw out a comment that reflected all the changes occurring between them. "Anita, I want you to be more practical. You need to stop wasting time on frivolities like reading books." "What do you mean?" she asked, her eyes flashing with hurt. "I mean, you need to think about our family," Charles replied, filling his glass with wine. "We need to think about how to make more money." "What's wrong with our family?" Anita asked. "We need to be more practical, not waste time," her husband said. "So, I should quit my job and become a housewife?" Anita couldn't hold back. "Of course not," Charles said, avoiding eye contact. "But I think you should focus on something more useful." Anita sat at the table, feeling utterly defeated. She felt Charles pulling away from her, but didn't understand why. The following months were filled with similar arguments. She tried to talk to her husband, but he didn't want to discuss anything. He had become cold and distant, as if Anita had become a stranger to him. One day, she accidentally found a note from Rebecca, Charles's mother, in the trash can. She had deliberately avoided their wedding, choosing to visit relatives on the coast instead. The note, written on a grid sheet of paper, expressed Rebecca's dissatisfaction with Anita's inability to get pregnant. Apparently, Rebecca had left this message during a visit when Charles was not at home. She wrote that Charles really wanted children and that Anita, in her opinion, wasn't making any effort to fulfill this dream. Anita read the note again, her heart tightening with pain and anger. She had always suspected that Rebecca wished her ill. Frankly, her mother-in-law had never accepted Anita, considering her unworthy of her son from the start. She constantly criticized her, hinting at her inadequacies both as a wife and a future mother. But such a direct, crude humiliation was something Anita couldn't forgive. That same day, she tried to discuss the note with Charles, but he refused to talk about it. "Well, she's just worried," Charles said, as if not understanding how his words were hurting her. "She wants grandchildren." "Well, that's really none of her business," Anita replied. "We decide when to have children." I know, Charles said, as if he didn't want to continue the conversation. Anita understood that her husband was probably under a lot of pressure from his mother. Rebecca had always been a domineering woman and was adept at manipulating people. Soon, Anita found out she was pregnant. Her happiness knew no bounds. At that moment, she sincerely hoped that this news would change Charles's attitude. She hoped he would become attentive and caring again. However, things did not turn out as she had hoped. I'm glad, Charles said, avoiding eye contact. But you know, I have a lot of work right now. Charles, Anita whispered, feeling a lump in her throat, this is our child. Why are you talking about it like it's something routine and mundane? I don't know, he answered honestly, I'm just not ready. At that moment, she felt deeply hurt. Of course, she understood that her husband might not have meant to hurt her, but his words felt like a knife wound. Soon, Anita began to have problems. Due to severe abdominal pain, she constantly felt unwell. Morning, noon, or evening, it was the same story. When Anita finally went to the doctor, she received an unsettling diagnosis, a threatened miscarriage. Anita was in despair. She wanted this child more than anything in the world and now feared losing it. The doctor prescribed rest and treatment. She had to leave work and stay at home. Her condition worsened with each passing day. Of course, Charles tried to support her, but there was almost no warmth or involvement in his eyes. Meanwhile, Rebecca constantly called Anita to inquire about her health, reminding her that she needed to do everything possible to preserve the pregnancy. Unfortunately, Anita's dream of becoming a mother was not meant to be fulfilled. Despite the doctor's efforts, she lost the baby she had already come to love more than anything in the world. About a month had passed. That evening, when Charles returned home late and exhausted from work, Anita was sitting in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, and staring out the window. She was devastated. The fresh pain from her loss wouldn't let her rest. With tears in her eyes, Anita remembered how she had carefully prepared the nursery, chosen a name, and imagined holding her tiny baby, her little miracle. Now, all those hopes had crumbled, leaving a void behind. Charles, dropping his jacket and shoes on the floor, went to the refrigerator, took out a bottle of water, and drank noisily. More than a month had passed since the tragedy, but he still couldn't find any comforting words. He said nothing about how he was dealing with the grief. How are you? He finally asked, standing partially turned away from Anita. She sighed. What could she say? How could she explain the emotional pain she was experiencing? I'm fine, everything is okay, Anita replied, struggling to hold back her tears. Charles nodded, not looking at her. He walked around the room, peeked into the bedroom, and then came back. Mom called, he said as if it were an ordinary matter, nothing special. She asked about you. Anita felt a shiver run through her body. She knew that Rebecca's calls were not just concern but a way to control her daughter-in-law and son. She wants you to visit her, Charles continued, reading from a script. She said that fresh air would do you good. I don't want to go anywhere, Anita said firmly. Her husband shrugged. As you wish, he said and left the room. That evening, Charles left for work as usual, without saying goodbye or expressing any words of love and concern for his wife. After dinner, Anita clearly remembered how she had accidentally overheard Charles's video call the day before. Yes, I'm on my way, he said, smiling tenderly at someone. Then, lowering his voice, he said something unintelligible, and Anita felt a pang of jealousy. At that moment, she clearly realized that he was talking to another woman. I'm waiting for you, the stranger on the other side of the screen whispered. I'll be there soon. Anita froze in shock. She was torn. On one hand, she didn't want to argue with Charles to preserve their family, but on the other, she didn't want to live a lie. The next day, when Charles came back from work, she asked him to join her in the living room. Charles, she said, I need to talk to you about something important. Her husband sat down on the couch and looked at her with innocent eyes. What's wrong? He asked, as if nothing had happened. I know all about your secret, Anita said firmly. Charles froze. His eyes widened. What secret? Don't pretend. I heard everything. Her husband remained silent. I don't know what to do. Charles, I love you, but I can't live this lie anymore. He stood up from the couch and paced the room like a caged lion. Do you have someone else? Anita finally asked, nearly shouting. Yes, he said. I have a mistress. Happy now? Is this what you've been trying to provoke all this time? How could you? Anita whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks. She left the house without looking back, barely packing any belongings. She took the first thing that came to hand. Getting into the car, she floored the accelerator and tore away. The wind howled menacingly, battering the car windows as if trying to make her stop, to return to the comfortable life she had endured for so long. But Anita, determined, ignored everything around her. She didn't know where she was going, but felt she needed to just get as far away as possible from the house, from Charles, from everything that painfully reminded her of their false family idol. His confession echoed in her ears, yes, I have a mistress. Each word sliced through her heart like a blade. She had believed for so long that their relationship was special, that they would overcome all difficulties together. How naive. She thought their love was eternal, that her husband would never dare to betray her. Fragments of their life together flashed through her mind like scenes from a faded black and white film. The wedding, the gleaming rings, the promise of eternal love, the birth of their daughter, and the cozy home. Now all of it seemed unreal, like a dream roughly interrupted by the jarring ring of betrayal. Anita gripped the steering wheel until her knuckles ached, squeezing harder with each passing second, feeling herself losing control of the car. Her mind was a void, filled only with the bitter sting of resentment and confusion. How could he? How dare he? Suddenly, a car appeared on the road, speeding toward her. Anita, unable to react in time, slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. Moreover, the brake pedal sank to the floor without having the desired effect. The two cars collided with tremendous force, throwing Anita into the void. At that moment, she became aware again that she was in a hospital. Her brain, still in shock, slowly began to bring her back to reality. From the state of anguished thoughts, Anita was brought back by the sound of a door opening. It was the nurse returning to set up in 4. I want to know now. Is Charles okay? Even though we had a small argument, I still care. Carrie sighed and looked at her. Anita, she said, I need you to be prepared for what you're about to hear. What happened? Carrie looked at her with regret and sympathy in her eyes. Your husband, Charles, the nurse began but couldn't continue, lowering her gaze. Anita realized something was clearly wrong with her husband. What's wrong with him? Anita asked more urgently. Carrie took her hand and squeezed it slightly. Charles, Carrie repeated, he decided he can no longer stay with you. The patient stared at the nurse in shock. She couldn't understand what had happened. Why did Charles do this, and what was she supposed to do now? He left me? Anita asked, struggling to comprehend. Yes, Carrie replied. Anita closed her eyes, feeling a sharp pain in her chest. She couldn't believe it. Why? What did I do wrong? Carrie shook her head, unable to answer. The only relief for Anita was the medication administered through the 4, which finally began to take effect. It felt like she had barely closed her eyes when she felt a gentle touch. Anita, Anita, can you hear me? A soft but firm voice called out. She struggled to open her eyes and saw a woman in a white coat, her features illuminated by the soft light of the lamp hanging above the bed. Yes, I hear you, Anita replied quietly. Don't worry, you're safe, the stranger reassured her. I'm Katrina Gibson, your attending physician. You have a compression fracture in your lumbar spine, a tear in the anterior cruciate ligament of your right knee, and soft tissue bruises. Oh no, Anita gasped. Anita, Katrina continued, you will need a long period of rehabilitation. You should be prepared for the fact that it won't be an easy journey. Anita squeezed her eyes shut, feeling her heart tighten from the doctor's words. At that moment, she felt as if she were chained to the bed, helpless and unable to move. Don't jump to extremes, the doctor said calmly, reading the patient's thoughts with skill. A spinal injury isn't a death sentence. With the right treatment and your own efforts, there's a chance you can return to a full life. Katrina set aside Anita's chart and picked up a pencil. You'll be prescribed a course of physical therapy with an aide. He will assist with the rehabilitation of your motor functions. You will also have access to psycho-emotional therapy for complete recovery. And will I be able to walk? Anita asked timidly. Yes, you will, Katrina reassured her. Of course, it will require considerable effort. Okay, Anita whispered, still not fully comprehending what the doctor had said. I'll return tomorrow. We'll see how you're feeling then, she said. For now, try to rest. Over the next few days, Anita underwent a series of procedures, bandages, injections, x-rays. It was painful. Sometimes she felt as if she might not endure it, but she didn't give up. She did begin to feel a little better. Then, one day, while she was lying in her room, staring at the bleak emptiness outside the window, an aide came in to help with the therapeutic procedures. Hello, Anita, he said. Bruce? Anita gasped, propping herself up on her elbows. He stood across from her, just as tall, with the same warm, radiant smile she remembered from their college years. Time seemed to have left him unchanged, his features the same. Only his gaze had grown wiser, holding a new sadness, as if marked by the burdens he had endured. Bruce lowered his eyes, as if embarrassed. Yes, it's me, he said in a quiet, slightly hoarse voice. I heard about the accident, transferred from another clinic, came as soon as I could. How are you? Anita asked, trying to pull herself together and not reveal her anxiety. Bruce moved closer, sat on the edge of the bed, and took her hand in his. I'm so glad you're alive, he whispered. She didn't know how to respond, unable to believe that Bruce was here, beside her, after 5 long years of silence, after all the hurt and disappointment they had gone through. She immediately remembered how she had rejected him back then, choosing the safety and stability of Charles, her future husband, and how quickly her choice had turned into a bitter, unfulfilled dream. Do you need any help? Bruce asked, noticing her confusion. I'm ready to do everything I can. You're not alone, you know? We're all here for you. Carrie, my cousin, helped me when I was at rock bottom after a failed marriage. Can you believe I lived on a dump for about 6 months? And she found me, helped me find myself again. She even got me a job. I need time to process everything, Anita whispered, still unable to believe that all of this was happening to her. Bruce nodded, understanding her. He stayed in the room for a while longer, talking with Anita about simple things, the weather, how she was feeling. Later, he brought her flowers, delicate white roses that smelled of freshness and hope. Anita looked at the bouquet, feeling that it symbolized a new, clean page in her life, one that was yet to be written but was already full of promises. After he left, Anita lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to piece together all her emotions. She wasn't sure what she felt about Bruce now, but one thing was clear, he meant a lot to her. For the next few days, Bruce visited her every day. He brought books, flowers, and fruit, talked with her, shared his news, and supported her, keeping her from sinking into despair. He helped Anita with physical therapy, giving her massages, brightening her days with his care and attention. Charles, on the other hand, hadn't bothered to visit even once. Anita began to feel better and better. Her body was recovering, and most importantly, her spirit was healing. She couldn't explain what was happening, but she felt that life was changing and she was rediscovering its flavor. One day, Bruce came with news. I have a surprise for you, he said with a wink. A letter for you arrived from abroad. It was delivered by a courier. And he strongly recommended that you see a notary right away. A letter? Anita exclaimed in surprise. but I don't have any relatives there. Bruce gave her a meaningful smile, then pulled an envelope from his lab coat pocket and handed it to her. She took it with trembling hands. Her heart raced wildly. She felt that something important was hidden inside, something that could change her life. Bruce watched her silently, not interfering. She slowly unwrapped the letter, her hand shaking so much that she could barely make out the contents. Inside was a document printed in a foreign language, filled with legal terms that meant nothing to her. "What is this?" she asked. Bruce shook his head. He also didn't know what the document was about. "I don't know. Maybe it's best to consult a lawyer? Perhaps he can explain everything?" Anita nodded in agreement. Bruce left the room, leaving her alone with the letter, which had become a symbol of a mystery waiting to be uncovered. Fortunately, the lawyer agreed to come that same day. William Terry turned out to be a stern man in an expensive suit, with a frowning, cold gaze. He carefully reviewed the documents, frowned, and muttered to himself. "This is a will. A will from someone named Albert Perez, who was a friend of your parents." Anita could hardly believe her ears. "Albert Perez?" she whispered. "But I don't know anything about him." The lawyer nodded. "He was a close friend of your parents," he said. "It seems they worked together on a project." "What kind of project?" Anita asked. The lawyer cleared his throat, as if he were uncomfortable. The project was related to gold mining. In 1994, your parents discovered a gold deposit, but they handed over the information to Albert when they went on an expedition that turned out to be their last. "But why did they do that?" Anita asked, astonished. "Most likely, your parents thought it was better for the business," the lawyer replied. "And what happened to Albert?" she asked, unable to hold back. "He started a private gold mining company, became wealthy, moved abroad, and died alone." "Alone?" Anita asked. The lawyer nodded. "He had no family," William said. "So Albert decided that the inheritance should go to you." "Why?" Anita asked. The lawyer smirked. "The will states that the deceased considered your parents to be his close friends. And you need to sign some documents and open a bank account. Everything will be handled quickly." "And how much money is there?" Anita inquired. The lawyer sighed and shrugged. "I can't give you a specific amount. You should consult with a financial advisor about that." Anita nodded and covered her face with her hands. Was this just a dream? What if she woke up and there was no inheritance at all? Bruce gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The touch was warm and comforting. In the following days, Anita spoke with lawyers and financial advisors over the phone. Even though she had a background in economics and knew how to manage money, invest, and optimize taxes, she was still overwhelmed. Deep down, Anita began to believe that she was now part of a world of wealth and luxury. Yet, she was also wary of losing herself in it and wanted to remain who she was before. Consulting with Bruce, Anita decided to use part of the inheritance to help others. She wanted to support those in need, especially those who could not afford medical care or education. With Bruce's assistance, she visited the city and, using crutches, went to the school she had once attended. Learning about the school's problems, she donated money for building repairs and new equipment. When Anita was finally discharged from the hospital, Bruce was waiting for her at the hospital entrance, holding a bouquet. Leaning on her cane, Anita got into his car, which he had bought from an elderly man for a symbolic price. As she looked at him, it felt like they had returned to a time when they were in love and full of hope.